Off the Page. I'm Will Cain with Jim Geraghty of National Review and of the blog Campaign Spot. So he's all over campaign. So, Jim, we've got one campaign that sent a huge, loud message across the Republican Party, I feel like, last night. Rand Paul, the Tea Party candidate, the outsider candidate, beats Trey Grayson, the establishment candidate, Mitch McConnell's pick, Dick Cheney's pick, not by a little bit, by, 23 points. What does this say?
I think one of the things that's interesting is that since he jumped into, decided he was running for the Senate, a lot of people saw Rand Paul through the eyes as his father's son. They heard, they saw the name, and kind of projected a lot of the Ron Paul 2008 campaign onto him. And, you watch Rand Paul in interviews, you watch him on the campaign stump. He's not, biologically he's his father's son, but I think he's his own man, and he has a very different style on the campaign trail.
Let me ask you this, Jim, on that note. So you're saying the establishment read into Rand a lot of the things that Ron stood for. This morning on The Corner, Catherine Lopez, who's on a cruise off in Portugal with other National Review personalities and guests, posted this. She said, at 10:10 a.m. where I am, the response on the National Review cruise towards the Rand Paul revolution, and she says this is unofficial, it's over breakfast and in the hallways, is Rand Paul better be electable. So I think you're right. There is some hesitation out there over whether or not he's kooky, whether or not he's Ron Paul.
Yeah, and I think, probably the best example of this is Wolf Blitzer had both the father and son on back in February, and he talks about foreign policy with them. Ron Paul has a position that I would characterize as isolationist. By saying that, I've guaranteed I'm going to get a million angry emails today.
Right.
But I think it's, Ron Paul was not enthusiastic about the war in Iraq, does not wants troops out of Afghanistan, wants to not deal with large chunks of the rest of the world. Rand Paul, when he criticizes policies in Afghanistan and Iraq, is much more careful about that. If he's opposing the Afghanistan war, he picks his tactics and targets that are most disagreeable to the public in a much more strategic way. The other thing I would note is that when Ron Paul was running on a very classically libertarian, shrink the government perspective in 2008, the deficit was not as large as it is right now. There was not this great public concern and frustration and anger over runaway spending. Since Ron Paul ran for president, we've seen the TARP bailout, we've seen the bailout of GM and automakers, we've seen the stimulus and no real great job growth or job creation from that.
Right.
We've seen healthcare. We've seen one giant spending program after another. And I think a lot of the issues that Ron Paul and this kind of classically libertarian, it's time to dramatically shrink the size of government, that resonates a whole lot differently now. And so I think there's kind of a sense that perhaps our issue environment has caught up to the Ron Paulians.
Has changed, yeah. So that makes it sound like, the Republican Party's ideology or importance or priority list of issues is what's changing. Just do this if you can for me real quick, Jim. Distinguish Rand Paul for me from the establishment candidates and what Mitch McConnell and Dick Cheney and these guys stand for. What is it that is different about Rand that voters are saying they want to see more of? Those issues?
I think so. I think this is he is pro-life, so he doesn't fit a lot of the traditional definitions of being libertarian, but I think it's a wholesale opposition to everything that I listed.
Right.
You still see a couple establishment Republicans who will argue that TARP was necessary. It's kind of interesting. In fact, you look back to Bennett's defeat in the Utah Republican Party conference. TARP is turning into kind of this interesting original sin that a lot of establishment Republicans may not have been big fans of, but thought it was really necessary at the time. And there was this conservative grassroots who were like, what are you kidding me? We're going to send large amounts of money to banks who've got themselves into trouble? No, it's nonsense.
Right.
That's not the job of the federal government. You're creating a moral hazard. I think that this is, this is to a certain extent, I don't know if it helped any establishment candidate to be endorsed by Dick Cheney and folks from the Bush administration. I think actually conservatives themselves, via con Dios, President Bush, via con Dios, Dick Cheney, it's time for a new face of conservatism and republicanism, and I think Rand Paul fits that, at least what they were looking for in Kentucky.
Right, so that new face also appears to have a little more of a Tea Party element in it. So is Rand Paul the poster boy for the Tea Party candidate, the poster boy, the leader of the Tea Party?
He's up there. I might put Marco Rubio in that list.
Right.
I think you might see a couple other candidates in these primaries emerge. But I think that, probably he is the most explicit example of this. And like I said, we talk about this changing issue environment. I don't think Rand Paul would win this primary in 2008 or 2006 or 2004.
Right.
Like I said, I really think the issue environment changed to to make his position seem not just much more palatable, but I think there's also a desire for a bit of radicalism, a bit of a sense of, you know what, we're fed up with spending, and we don't want to hear the usual excuses of, well, we have to save this program. Right. You really can't cut what that program does.
That's the view of the radicalism from the right. There's also the view of Kentucky and this election, a radicalism from the left. So we can expect Rand Paul, should he be elected now, to reinstitute Jim Crow laws, right, and to try to segregate schools, because the Tea Party is racist, right?
But no, libertarian, you ignore all that kind of stuff.
What is it, besides impugning racism on the Tea Party, and which Rand Paul is now at least one of the poster boys of it, what is it that the left finds so villainous about this movement?
This is a popular uprising. This is lots of people who have been previously apolitical or ignored the political process are getting involved. Something that a lot of folks on the left have been calling for a really long time. But they're coming in on the wrong side in the eyes of the left. And so these people should, no, don't get active. Go back to your couches. Go back to watching reruns on TV. We don't want you to get politically active.
Right.
It's political activism from the wrong side. And as a result, it's not seen as this, power to the people. Finally, an engaged citizenry is being much more active in democracy and telling the government exactly what kind of policies they want. Now it's the ruffians. The peasants are revolting. They're coming over the hill. They brought their pitchforks and torches, and it's the end of civilization as we know it. It's the usual elitism and disdain for people who didn't go to the right schools.
Yeah, and the message
they don't drink the right kind of organic milk. And to use an example of my.
Yeah, and the message is loud and clear that if you care about debt, deficit, entitlements, reform, you, my friend, are a racist and a villain. You guys, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's very revealing. There's not generally, I want to cut the budget. It usually doesn't have a tremendous racial connotation to it. And you would think that, folks on the left would, they always give lip service to balancing the budget and, fiscal good judgment. I think this kind of shows a lot of folks on the left, look, their perspective is there'll always be more money.
Right.
You just tax the rich more and the money will come along. You don't see a lot of really intense concern about the deficit on the left. And I think it's because they think that somewhere Scrooge McDuck's money bin is just over the next hill, and if we just take it from, the money from there, everything will be taken care of.
Right. Okay, thanks, Jim. You guys can find Jim at the campaign spot on nationalreview.com and follow me on Twitter at Will Cain.